AI is moving fast. So fast, it's hard to keep up. In fact, in ServiceNow's latest AI Maturity Index, scores dipped 20% from last year. But that's okay, because AI isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. You may be behind today, but tomorrow you could be a pace setter. Dive into ServiceNow's AI Maturity Index and see how you can innovate as fast as your ambitions. Visit servicenow.com/AI maturity.
10 years from today, Lisa Schneider will trade in her office job to become the leader of a pack of dogs. As the owner of her own dog rescue, that is. A second act made possible by the reskilling courses Lisa's taking now with AARP to help make sure her income lives as long as she does. And she can finally run with the big dogs. And the small dogs, who just think they're big dogs. That's why the younger you are, the more you need AARP. Learn more at aarp.org/skills.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. Joining me now is Nick Bryant, investigative journalist and author. Nick Bryant is literally the first reporter in the world to cover the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. He's also written an extraordinary book on the Franklin scandal, which is often distorted, but the Franklin scandal took place in Washington, D.C., in which children were being supplied to high-level government officials in the Bush administration. Nick Bryant took his initial story about Jeffrey Epstein's little black book, which he was able to obtain from a source, to a number of media outlets. I guess he was freelancing, and nobody was interested in this incredible story about a billionaire pedophile and his very important friends until ultimately Gawker published that book. I relied heavily on that book with attribution in my own book, The Clintons' War on Women. Nick Bryant, what a long, strange road it's been. Welcome to the Stone Zone.
It has indeed been a long, strange trip, but glad to be with you, Roger.
I remember a very, very, very cold day when we were together. We were both going to meet Steve Hoffenberg, who had been Epstein's boss at Tower Financial. He later went to prison in an epic Ponzi scheme. We met him after he had gotten out of prison. He told us at the time, Jeffrey Epstein is going to be arrested for running a national pedophile ring. I think we were both a little skeptical, but of course everything Hoffenberg told us turned out to be true.
He seemed to be very psychologically damaged from 18 years in prison, which is completely understandable. So I didn't know exactly what to make of his disclosures.
Were you surprised when you came to all these major mainstream outlets with this blockbuster story? This would go on to be a story that has now dominated our politics for several days. I mean, this is a guy who died several years ago, I believe, yet the media can't seem to get enough of this story. The real tragedy here, and I know you agree with this, is getting lost in all of this are his victims. Justice for his victims, the people he damaged, the people he assaulted, the people who, in some cases, destroyed.
Yeah, and his cronies, too. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein was definitely trafficking these young girls to a wide range of people. And we know that from victim testimony. So it just wasn't Jeffrey Epstein acting alone. He was acting in concert with several other people.
Last time I interviewed you, and I think it was because you have written a book, The Truth About Watergate, A Tale of Extraordinary Lies and Liars, which I must tell you is the definitive book on Watergate. Nick Bryant managed to take a very complicated story. By the way, Nick's not a conservative. He's not a Republican. Neither is he a Democrat or a liberal. He's just kind of a down-the-center investigative journalist. His politics do not bleed into his reporting, but he nails Watergate, which is why I had him on to talk about it. But when we spoke at that time, we spoke about the fact that there seems to be a commonality in all of these cases, whether it is the Epstein case, whether it is the Ghislaine Maxwell case, whether it is the Diddy case. The main perp gets nailed. Epstein gets charged with conspiracy to engage in child sex trafficking, but none of his co-conspirators are ever identified. The same with Maxwell, the same with Diddy. And as you pointed out, one U.S. attorney presided over all those cases.
Well, it was Damian Williams, who was the U.S. attorney that presided over the Maxwell trial. And he made sure that only victims that were molested by Epstein or Maxwell were called. There were 4 victims that were called, and they had no knowledge of the wider network. So he did his job there as far as containment. And then he went on to oversee the Diddy grand jury. And the Diddy grand jury was kind of a joke. I mean, I knew as soon as he announced it that it was going to be a joke. The thing about Diddy is that, and also we could say that about Epstein and the perpetrators for Franklin, for that matter, what brought all these guys down, at least as far as law enforcement, is they were getting too much media. I believe the Franklin network was certainly about blackmail, and the Epstein network was about blackmail. And then we find out that there are all these hidden cameras in Diddy's various homes, and that's been heavily corroborated. So I think that all 3 were involved in blackmail. But with Diddy, there were 5 civil cases pending against him when that grand jury was convened. And 2 of those cases had been, he had trafficked minors. And that was glossed over by Damian Williams. And Little Rod was the 5th case, and that's when it reached critical mass where the government said, well, we have to do something about this. Little Rod, his name is Rodney Jones, and he's a hip-hop producer, and he was talking about Diddy trafficking underage girls and boys, and also about his hidden cameras. So with Epstein and also with Diddy, I believe that these are blackmailers, and blackmailers aren't going to be very successful when everybody knows that they've got hidden cameras. So I think that kind of concludes their careers as blackmailers.
As you know, there's been a lot of controversy about, quote unquote, Epstein's list. And I don't think there ever was like a formal list. You were the first person to publish his little black book, which I believe you attribute to his butler, Alfredo Rodriguez, no longer with us, although I believe it was you who noted that he circled the name of VIPs in the book who he thought were involved with sex with underage girls who might be material witnesses to pedophilia. I think there never was a list per se. Seems to me, given all the DVDs and the hard drives removed at the time of his 2019 arrest from Epstein's palatial home in New York, his island, Little St. James in the Virgin Islands, from his ranch in New Mexico, and I believe also from his apartment in Paris, that law enforcement should be able to piece together a list from watching those videos. But those videos and those hard drives seem incredibly to have completely disappeared.
Well, the strange memo that was released by the Justice Department and FBI last week actually said that there were 300 gigabytes of child abuse material, but there isn't anybody else in the child abuse material other than the children. And that's a little, that's ludicrous, because there were definitely adults molesting these girls. And I have no doubts that a lot of that was blackmail footage, because all of Epstein's homes had hidden cameras. So for the Department of Justice and the FBI to say that I do agree that there were over 1,000 victims, but for them to say that it was only Epstein that molested these over 1,000 victims, that is very absurd, and people are rightfully incredulous of it. That is not the truth, and I just wish that the Trump administration would just start telling us the truth on this. It keeps digging itself deeper into a hole, in March, Pam Bondi said that she was going to release the quote-unquote Epstein files. And then what she released was like a nothing sandwich. There were no new revelations. And as you said, I put the Black Book up on the internet in 2015. And then I saw, and with that book, for the adults, we redacted their numbers. And there's over 100 victims in that Black Book. And we redacted their last names and their numbers. The Black Book that I put up, that Bondi released 10 years later, everything was redacted. So I don't know what was going on with the Department of Justice thinking that they could give us something that we already knew and think that it was revelatory. That really, I think, really got the Trump administration into trouble. And then Bondi got further into trouble when she did say that there was a truckload of evidence. That was her term. And only matters related to national security would be redacted from the documents. So now she has to tell us what a bunch of child molesters have to do with national security. And I think the crescendo of her mendacity was because, as you noted, Roger, there was a lot of disks and there were hard drives taken out of Epstein's home. Actually, the day after he was arrested, the FBI hit his home in New York almost immediately and opened up his safe. And his safe was not the dimensions of the safe that we think about. His safe was like the size of a closet. And Bondi led us to believe that all that material that was taken out of Epstein's safe was being reviewed by the Department of Justice at that time, when I have no doubts that the FBI and whatever dark malignant corner of intelligence deployed Epstein, they were looking at everything in Epstein's safe that day. And probably people did double shifts making sure what was on Epstein's disks and hard drives. So the Trump administration keeps digging itself deeper and deeper in a hole with these remarks about Jeffrey Epstein.
It is puzzling, and even for me. Let me just ask you a direct question. In all of your research into Jeffrey Epstein, have you seen or heard any evidence whatsoever that Donald Trump himself engaged in any inappropriate behavior in or around with anyone in or around Jeffrey Epstein?
With Trump, Alfredo Rodriguez circled people that he said were in cahoots with Jeffrey Epstein as far as his pedophilic pandering. And a number of those people that were circled were certainly in cahoots. There was Ghislaine Maxwell was circled, Ehud Barak, Les Wexner, Alan Dershowitz, Bill Richardson, and Jean-Luc Brunel, who was a fellow pimp of Epstein's. They formed a modeling agency together, MC Squared. So, and then we have victim testimony that corroborates that these circled people in Epstein's Black Book. Rodriguez did circle Trump's name, and Trump said he'd never been to Epstein home, but we know that he had. And then we also know that he flew on his plane. But I haven't come across any victims that said that they were molested by Trump. So you can make with that what you will.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed Virginia Roberts-Giuffre for 6 hours, 3-hour sessions. I read all of her testimony. She said that she did meet Donald Trump. He went to a charity event at Epstein's home, which I report in my book, and that he was a perfect gentleman. Also, Roberts-Giuffre, who we were told recently committed suicide. I will come back to that. Said both in her sworn testimony, but her lawyer and she both said afterwards the only well-known public figure who would help her, who would support her in a lawsuit, and who would help her was Donald Trump. I've written about Trump being on Epstein's plane. The plane flew from New York, actually Teterboro, New Jersey, to Palm Beach, leaving on a Friday, coming back on a Sunday, and Marla Maples, his wife at the time, and his daughter Tiffany Trump were on the flight. None of these flights, based on the FAA records that I examined, you reported extensively about this, show Trump going to the island. I don't believe there's any evidence he was ever on the island. He certainly denied it. So I don't think... I have
no evidence of him being on the island.
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
I said, I haven't seen any evidence of Trump being on Epstein's island.
Yeah, nor have I. So I do think this much we know. Trump definitely cuts Epstein off prior to Epstein being exposed and charged with sex crimes in Florida. And this happens when Epstein makes an improper advance to an underage girl working in the spa at Mar-a-Lago. Trump hears about this. He bans Epstein from all of his properties and from his life. Juxtapose that with Bill and Hillary Clinton, who continue to socialize with Epstein, who continue to take contributions to Epstein. And Virginia Giuffre, in her sworn testimony, says that Bill was on the island at least once. Bill has denied that. The FAA records seem to indicate that Bill was on the Lolita Express at least 26 times. That's the number that I have felt comfortable using based on research. So it's interesting to me. Epstein is clearly much closer to the Clintons than he ever was to Donald Trump. Therefore, I reject this motive that Trump is covering this all up because he himself has exposure or vulnerability. Why would you pledge to expose everything if that were the case? If you're just tuning in, this is the Stone Zone. I'm talking to one of the best journalists in the country, Nick Bryant. We're going to talk about your 501c3 that you've set up to help the victims of Jeffrey Epstein when we come right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back in the Stone Zone. We're talking to Nick Bryant, investigative journalist and author. He is the man who broke the Jeffrey Epstein story when he obtained Jeffrey Epstein's Little Black Book. Nobody would publish that. And ironically, Gawker, no longer in business, then considered to be the mean kids of the media, had the fortitude to publish the story. And the story was kept alive by Julie Brown, a crusading reporter at the Miami Herald, whose politics are not mine, but she's a fine journalist. Nick, you've set up a 501c3 nonprofit group, Epstein Justice, that's working to ensure that all the pedophiles who used Jeffrey Epstein to satisfy their sick predatory desires are put behind bars. Can you speak about your important work there and how people can get involved in that fight?
Your audience, they just have to go to EpsteinJustice.com and they can sign up with us. Because Epstein has been in the news a lot lately, our organization is beginning to grow. And we want two relatively simple things. I mean, just that would be considered baseline morality. We want to know why the government covered up child trafficking. And when you cover up a crime, you're aiding and abetting that crime. So essentially, the government is aiding and abetting child trafficking in the Epstein case. And we want the perpetrators to be prosecuted. Very simple. If our government had any kind of decency, that would happen. And we need a majority in the House and we need a majority in the Senate. And to make this, that we can do it. I think that people are really, really fed up over this story. And our government has lied to us before on a number of different things. But this is different because it involves American children getting molested with impunity. And I think that this is an issue that can bring the right and the left together, because the right and the left have been divided and conquered. And the right and the left need to come together on this issue so we can protect our children.
In the short term, I have urged the president to direct the attorney general to direct the interim U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York to move in court to unseal all of the grand jury testimony and evidence in Jeffrey Epstein's 2019 indictment by the Trump administration for child sex trafficking and conspiracy to commit child sex trafficking, and on the basis of a whistleblower, also very important to unseal the search warrants for Epstein's home in New York and for the island, both issued out of the Southern District of New York. I hope the president is listening. I hope he will do that. I think that would go a long way to start to answer a lot of these puzzling questions. Anyway, we have to end this here. I want to thank my guest, Nick Bryant. Again, go to EpsteinJustice.com, EpsteinJustice.com, to get in the fight to expose those who have done wrong in the name of justice for all of Jeffrey Epstein's victims. Also commend to you Nick Bryant's book on Watergate, The Truth About Watergate, A Tale of Extraordinary Liars and Liars. It is the definitive book on Watergate, why it happened, how it happened, who the good guys were, who the bad guys were, who the guys who were in the dark were. I commend that to you as well. Nick, thanks for making the time to join us today in the Stone Zone.
Thanks for listening to the Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear the Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?